Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to welcome the Finance Minister. She comes at a time when there is a lot of activity in the economy, so I'm hoping we're going to be having a lot of interesting answers. And of course, from the audience, I'm hoping we'll have some interesting questions. I'm going to start right away. The growth numbers came out a few days ago, and they positively surprised everyone. What is your sense now? Do you think that we will be able to keep this momentum up? Do you think this year could act? I know you're very hesitant to give specific numbers, and with good reason, but do you think this year could actually end up being better than many of us expected?
No, I like it to be better than many of what people expected it to be. All indications are that it can be better. But a moment of caution for me would be how this new variant is going to develop of COVID. Although at the moment scientific evidences, as much as is available, gives us a feeling that whilst this one spreads too fast, but it may not be all that worrisome, but you really can't rely on any such word at this stage. So a sense of wanting to be sure, and that is why I think the Prime Minister repeats, please, masks will have to be worn and then protocol to be followed. And the centre has also sent advisory to the states to ensure that the protocols are followed and procedures to be adopted and so on. So that sense of caution and that sense of or an element of uncertainty continues. But I must give it to the give a word of praise to the people of India for continuously being able to adjust and move along with changing realities. Of course, there are sections which have gone through it far more than others, and we have to be conscious of that. But with all this said, I'm still very hopeful that this year's GDP numbers would be very encouraging, and we'll still be the fastest growing economy in the world.
We've seen over the last 20 months, the unfortunate aspect has been it's all been stop-start.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you start something and then things go bad, you have to stop. And going forward, I think it's very important that we manage to keep things going even if there is a variant. Now, one of the things that has happened in this stop-start is that it's the smaller people who seem to have been affected much more. And of course, for people at the bottom of the pyramid, there is the food scheme that the government has, which has been extended. But small enterprises, can you tell us a little bit about what your efforts have been to ensure that they don't go under?
Well, what I would like to think, and data shows it also, a very successful purpose-serving scheme of the government, even during the pandemic, was this emergency liquidity guarantee credit scheme, which was, even to start with and for a long duration when the scheme ran, it is still on. It was tailored to meet the requirement of the MSMEs. Together with it was this, and that was sovereign guaranteed, so nobody had to pay any extra document or security or also bring in anything else in the name of somebody else's signature to stand by them or anything. It was to be given to everybody, nobody was excluded. And in that scheme, the current data, which came only probably a week ago, we get to know that more than 5 crore people who were employed in these MSMEs, slightly over 5 crores, have not been thrown out of the job. They were kept intact and they've continued to be retained in their jobs thanks to the ECGLS scheme. So if that itself is one indicator that government scheme which was planned during the pandemic purely to be able to address the requirement of MSMEs, this is an indicator to show that people being retained, particularly in MSME, they are not going to be high-flung employees. So that is one indicator which tells me that it helped the small units, helped employees of these small units. The other data, of course, is about the EPFO, the contribution of pension given by the government. Both the employer's part of it and the employee's part of it, which is about 24% both put together, for those who are drawing a salary of 15,000 or lesser. We've had quite a success in that scheme. A lot of industries have said, would you please extend it to the next year as well, because we didn't restrict it only for those who were actually with them earlier, and in case they've been sent out, we didn't insist that the very same person should come back. We said, so long as you're able to bring the same person back, it's fine. Or else you fill that post up with whoever, but you still will get the 24%. Has actually made a big difference for many of the employers, and they're all small. Again, the employee's salary-based description is it is a small employee, and at the same time the units are small units. So concrete data shows that these two are good examples for us to see that during the pandemic and little after that also, and even after the second wave, and even after 31st October when we managed to have a 1 billion vaccination achieved, this scheme continues. So we are doing that. And the third thing, and I'll finish with that, the eShram portal, which was purely for registering informal sector workers, and like employment exchange, it also sort of pulls people to go, has now seen many more informal sector workers register. So one important aspect of what has come out of various, the kind of scheme-backed changes which are happening in the economy is informal is now more than likely becoming formal. The formalization of informal sector workers is something which even, I'm saying it with a sense of responsibility, even a formalized trade union movement couldn't achieve this level of, and I'm not saying this with a sense of, oh, see, we've achieved it, but the pandemic and the linked challenges have created this an opportunity on its own that the formalization of informal sector workers is rapidly happening.
We'll come back to that formalization question in a bit, but staying with growth. The numbers show that we've reached pre-pandemic levels in absolute terms, GDP. And you look at GST collection on the other side, again, it's record. It's higher than, it's the second highest ever last month. And it's also higher than what it was in the corresponding period before the pandemic in 2019. Do you think that at the macro level, we have managed to put the effects of the pandemic behind us and are now on a steadier path of growth?
To a large extent, yes. This I will use metrics to explain it. There may be very many heads on which you measure the performance of the economy, but largely about out of say 40 or more than 40 indicators, 22 of them are surely very clear indicator of what is happening in the economy, high frequency indicators. So even if there are 40 or more, 22 are periodically referred to, and in those 22, 19 instances, in 19 of them, we've achieved pre-pandemic or even crossed the pre-pandemic level, meaning we have performed now much better than the pre-pandemic level in those 19 of the 22 high frequency indicators. About 3 of them have problems because of the nature of that particular sector. Tourism is one which needs no explaining. The world is yet to be completely back to where it was as regards tourism. It is affected because of the flights movement, opening of airports, closing of airports, uncertainties about testing requirements, quarantine requirements, and so on. So if 19 out of 22 high frequency indicators are showing that you not just reached the pre-pandemic level, probably crossed it also, and that in the last 10 months, the kind of figures that you've seen and the figure that you're seeing in the PMI of both services and of manufacturing, services particularly, because that is still, person to person, person involved, and a services sector which India had great, performance. If in that your PMI index is the highest in the last 10 months, 58.5 last month and 58.1 this month, there is a consistency to this performance. And therefore, I would think talking about it as have we reached the pre-pandemic level is one thing, have we crossed the pre-pandemic level is the next. Even better indicator is that it is consistent. And that consistency is not over just 1 or 2 months, over several months. So I think growth, you can be sure, otherwise you wouldn't have had many of the agencies which had come up with their assessment early March this year, and after which came the second wave, and many of them had to go back to the drawing board and say, is India going to be at that level or not? In the last 1 or 2 months, people have looked at what is happening in India, and many of them have retained what they had said in March, even now for this year. And S&P, for instance, only a few days ago, I said we retained the figure of 9.5 for India this year, meaning highest, fastest growing economy this year, and we improve our numbers for the next year. So these are not quick fix numbers. They do their homework, they look at the economy in a very comprehensive manner. So the growth story, I think, thanks to the tenacity and the perseverance shown by the Indian people, is actually resulting in this growth number, consistency, and also indicating what's going to happen in the next year.
For the benefit of the audience, when the finance minister speaks of high frequency indicators, she's referring to economic and other indicators that come out with a frequency higher than a quarter, maybe a month or so. Things like purchase managers index that she spoke of, car sales, and 19 of them are in the green, as we would like to say, which means they are higher than what they used to be at the corresponding period, even pre-pandemic. You spoke about forecasts by various agencies, and many of them have retained forecasts, some of them have upped their forecasts. Everyone seems to think that 2021 and 2022 will be good, which is fine. So I'm not going to ask you about that. But in October, IMF came out with a paper which was an estimate which had to do with a more structural measure, which is the long-term economic growth potential of the Indian economy. And where they cut it a little bit and they said around 6%. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Because again, that's not a measure of immediate economic growth. So it doesn't mean that we are going to grow at that level in 2021 or 2022. But it means that that is the optimal level at which the economy can grow in the long term without really overheating.
I would think that and a bit more, rather than just 6 or 7. It can be even a bit more, of course. That will have to be enabled through several steps that the government has to keep taking. Not just the solutions, or not that just the issues that we have marked up for this year or the next year, but even more consistent, making economy feel easier to activate, making businesses feel possible that India can do its business ecosystem a lot more transparently, keep it cleaner, keep it possible for anyone to come and do their business. Also making sure that globally we are constantly engaging with those who matter in the world of investment, who matter in the world of decision making as regards global concerns, whether it is energy security, whether it is looking at climate change or issues of global finance, or even the issues of the cryptocurrency about which all of us are talking today, regulation about global ways of best practices and so on. So India's engagement globally, India's engagement in various platforms talking on different issues of investment, multilateral funding and so on, together with domestic policies which will have to be consistent, whether it is on taxation or whether it is on ways in which we do business, and greater synergy, which I would say, I'm saying it last, but it is going to be top of the agenda, I would think, greater synergy between center and state, federal mechanism really feeling the story as one. We'll have to brazen up for good, strong, well-riveted growth, for which both center and states will have to work together.
Had we been talking in 2019, one of the things that I would have raised regarding facilitating higher long-term growth would have been tax reforms of the kind that you did for corporate taxes in September 2019, which I think would have been one measure because it definitely makes industry more competitive. What are the other measures specifically that you think would increase the capacity of the Indian economy to grow at a faster rate in the longer term?
Surely two things which all of us have been talking about, I'm not saying it for the first time here today: compliances and the burden of compliances. How much ever we talk about ease of doing business in various ways, unless the compliance burden is reduced, and that down to the level of the panchayats, the three-layered system being what it is, no good if Government of India tries to clean or some states try to make it easier. It has to be consistently down to the level of the panchayats. The local bodies are actually the recipients of the investments in a way. And if the decision making is complicated, time consuming, burdensome, it cannot help. So ease of doing business and compliance burden being reduced is one of the things. And second, consistency in taxation. I would think that is one of the, I go back to the example that you gave about corporate tax reduction. Hasn't it shown even at a time of pandemic that it has brought in benefits? You are able to see that industry today can think in terms of wanting to expand their capacities, wanting to invest in newer areas. So that one decision which was prior to the pandemic, nobody knew of the pandemic at that time, has actually come to play very well for our benefit. But over and above that, also the certainty point of view. Both direct taxes and indirect taxes should have a level of predictability. Frequent changes or frequent complication or ifs and buts added to them can put off business. Their business planning can go for a toss. So I would think for the economy to have the benefit of better business planned enterprises, we need to have these two absolutely top of the agenda.
Does that mean we're going to see some rapid movement on the direct tax code?
Well, I'm not speaking about the budget now.
When you look at, again, the macroeconomic situation, one of the indicators that has been worrying a few people is inflation. And obviously there are two schools of thought regarding this. One that believes that it is mainly a supply side issue and that it will pass. And there's another which believes that it is a much more structural problem and that core inflation could create some concern because it's been stubborn for some time. Are you worried about inflation?
See, the targeting of inflation in India, this part of my answer is purely on your technical question. And those of us who might say, all right, for the finance minister to talk of numbers and the technicalities, but Aam Aadmi in the ground is playing more, I come to that a bit later. First question, first aspect of it is India's targeting of inflation is not targeting a number. In the sense, the 4% number that we frequently talk about is the midpoint. We allow for a plus or minus 2%. So if inflation has breached 6, then it's a matter of concern. And twice in the last few months, yes, it crossed 6. And therefore, it was an immediate issue for all of us. And we as group of ministers sat down, decided that some of the duties will have to be reduced for importing certain goods which are essential for our, let's say, edible products. And also trying to allow for greater imports of some of the things which were restricted in terms of the quantum that can be brought into this country. So edible oil or pulses all were considered on this route. And by the time the impact of these come to the ground, it does take a couple of months, by which time definitely it hurts the budget planning of middle class and even the poorer sections of our society. In the meanwhile, we try to release stocks which are held of grains or pulses, but obviously that can have an impact only. And when we're talking of pulses, it's also some pulse for some states are more desired, and whilst the other states don't even care for it. Like, for instance, if you were to talk of southern states, it's tur dal, whereas elsewhere it's moong. A third eastern part of India desires only chena. So there are, how much of quantity of each would you have in the buffer stock is a different issue altogether. And issues, again, broadly, which you called as supply side issue, issues of perishable vegetables and fruits, whether they are onions, whether they are tomatoes, supply constraints are particularly in this year. Every year we have that cycle between one crop and the other, by which time the stocks are depleted and you're waiting for the next harvest to come, and therefore in between you have this problem. But this year, the problem has been much aggravated because of floods in some areas, floods at a time when you're just about to harvest, and that itself has finished the crop because they are quickly perishable ones, they can't take waterlogging. So really there are practical problems in the supply side. I remember 2 years ago we started having this radiation method along with the Baba Atomic Research Center to make sure that perishable commodities can be given a slightly longer shelf life if only they are radiated to acceptable levels, particularly for edible products. That is only being done in a very small quantity. It is not yet adequately picked up. So the ways to prevent perishable crops from losing shelf life have to be ramped up. But for now, I think by early January, those commodities which are in short supply should be back on the shelves. With that, we expect the prices of perishable goods to come down. And on the edible oil, enough and more imports have been allowed. Imports are coming in, and that should take care of some of the edible oil, whether it's palm oil or refined oils. Peculiar problems of, particular problems of sarson should be all right sooner when the refineries, oil extractors can get a better job done of it. So more than the systemic problems, it is the supply side aggravation which is causing this year particular difficulties.
We are roughly halfway through the session, so if you have any questions, please, there are sheets of paper on your table, write the questions, someone will pick them up, and I'd be happy to ask them later. Disinvestment. We are now fairly close to the end of the financial year, and there's a certain disinvestment target that you mentioned last year in the budget, and we are still quite some distance away from it. Do you think we'll be able to meet it? Specifically, do you think we'll be able to finish the BPCL strategic sale, the LIC IPO, because those two done would mean that you meet the target? Do you think that's likely to happen before the end of the financial year?
Well, we are progressing with each one of them with the the detailing, which requires a lot of time. I've explained this once before also. The meticulousness or the fastidiousness with which people have to look into the files and papers, because it is necessary to tie every loose end, because the intent may be clear and open. The process may be very clear, again transparent, because there's no other intention except wanting to disinvest them. However, the tying up of the loose ends among the bureaucracies and the different departments consumes its own time. And that is what we are trying to speed up. I think the Air India story itself will tell you that even despite the pandemic, the extent of work which had happened and the absolute transparency with which it has got cleared, the same is the approach for dealing with the rest of them. Till before Air India was over, Air India was the first question anyone would ask me, is Air India happening? Now that's over, you're looking into the list to ask me about others. And I will say that will be the same approach with which we'll clear the others too.
I was going to ask Air India after that, actually. When will Air India be truly over? Because
Well, I think Deepam Secretary has commented on it, hasn't he? Said by 31st December, the handing over to the new buyer would happen.
you spoke about the importance of center-state relations, and especially true in the area of GST. Over the last 20 months, there has been some fiscal tension, for want of a better word, between the center and the states. Are things better now? Do you think that tension is more or less gone?
I don't think there is a tension this year. 2020, we did have discussions after discussions to make sure that a formulation which is acceptable to everybody is arrived at. And after that, the methodology through which the money was to be borrowed was also to be taken up and executed. I'm glad to say that year it ended off well. Everybody received the amounts as was promised in time. This year, both the GST compensation and the devolution based on the Finance Commission recommendations, tax amounts, have been devolved not just in time. In both the cases, I have even given them front-loaded. So suppose we were talking of September time, up to September, the amount which had to be paid under compensation was even paid in June. And this year, sometime in October, the amount which had to be paid by December had already been paid in October. In order to help the states, because infrastructure spending was clearly identified even in the budget as a key driver for the economy to get the right stimulus and revive. The center was doing that. And in order to facilitate states to do it, we have been front-loading even the GST compensation. And so did I also make sure that the devolution per Finance Commission's recommendation is also done well in advance of the time, so that states will not be left with money as a problem, cash in hand problem. So they've been given cash in hand, untied to anything. We have given them 50-year loan interest-free last year and this year also, so that they can immediately take up any one major project which is waiting to be completed, so that money goes to the ground through the implementation of the project. So as much as possible and as our revenue collection improved, we've also been pushing that to the states back so that they have more money in their hand. So this year, even going by the public statements given from the various states, I don't think there is an issue about center not giving resources in time or center not giving adequate resources. We've been doing that, so I don't see any major concern about money reaching them. There may be other concerns, but not about money reaching them in time.
There have been a spate of reports about, I know it's the GST Council that decides this, about a tweaking of rates again, about moving the slabs down. Do you think that makes sense at this point in time when things are stabilizing, your GST collections are increasing, there seems to be some stability in the whole process?
This is not a decision taken in the last meeting. It's a decision taken quite some time ago, probably 2 GST Council meetings earlier. And even then the consideration was, let's not implement it now. Now, the intent is not to raise more revenue. In these 2 particular steps about which you're referring, the intent is not to raise revenue. The intent is to plug the quantum of refund which was going. We were paying more refunds, or we were giving ITC credit refunds, much more than the amount of tax which is being collected in these 2 cases. So it was necessary at the earliest to correct this anomaly in the name of inversion. And if we didn't collect, everything would have appeared to be normal, but the GST Council was going to go on paying amount without earning anything out of it. It doesn't make sense. And this ITC piling up in the hands of some of those manufacturers, and they coming and telling you, look, we don't get enough, taxed through the sale, and therefore this is piling, and I'm unable to also exhaust that ITC which is piling up with me. How do I extinguish it? So it was leading to an anomaly, and the anomaly was getting aggravated. So we had to correct it. It was not with an intent of wanting to get more revenue through it. And even now, well in advance in October, we had said that it is getting implemented from 1st January 22. It wasn't as if we were implementing it overnight.
This is a question which you probably thought I would ask first. It's on crypto. It's on something that you've been asked questions everywhere, and I think it's quite possible that a lot of people in this room have also invested in cryptocurrencies. In fact, I'm quite sure that many people in this room have invested in cryptocurrencies. What is your thinking in terms of cryptocurrencies? I know there is a law, so I'm not asking you for specifics. From the point of view of a sovereign cryptocurrency or a sovereign virtual currency, and from the point of view of the unregulated private currencies, many of which are now being speculated on, traded on. So what's your view on cryptocurrencies? Should we have one, a sovereign cryptocurrency? And what's your view on regulating private cryptocurrencies?
The one luxury that a minister doesn't have is for her to answer questions of this nature when the parliament is in session. So you will pardon me for that. There is certainly a well consulted bill which is coming through. Once the cabinet clears it, it will certainly come into the parliament. On the floor of the house, with questions being asked by members, some answers were given. And even there, I had reminded the members saying I may not be able to get into the details of it. They have to wait for the bill to come. I would think that's the answer I will be expected to give even outside of the house.
Do you think there is a lot of unregulated speculation that's happening in
100%. Yes, there is a lot of speculation.
And do you think that's healthy?
That's not healthy at all.
And, but will there be adequate safeguards to ensure that people who've invested in them don't get their fingers burnt in case there is a law, which sort of, or in case there's regulation?
Well, that the parliament will have to decide on it. The parliament will have to decide.
I was just trying to make sure that the people who've invested in cryptocurrencies, their money is safe. We've made certain, slightly more macro question. We've made certain commitments in Glasgow regarding the climate and necessary commitments, I think, very responsible commitments, much more than many of the first world countries did. But there is an economic impact to this. GDP, most of these countries, if you look at it, many of the rich countries grew their economies strongly on the basis of traditional fuels. So the carbon intensity of GDP growth for them in their glory years was very, very high. Whereas we are now in a position where we have to cut the carbon intensity of GDP growth going forward. What kind of scenario planning has the finance ministry done in terms of how our long-term growth is likely to be given these commitments that we've made?
No, the commitments have been made by the Honorable Prime Minister after quite a lot of consultation within the government. And the commitments were made also realizing the level at which, or the stage of development at which we are. And that is one of the reasons you will see that we have not really gone all the way down the road to say my thermal energy production will be completely phased out. We have not said that, because our dependence on coal, particularly because the base level of energy production depends on coal, and that cannot be replaced through solar or wind or anything else. So that without that base, any incremental addition which is being made cannot be made, and that base has to be stable, for which you need something like the thermal production, probably efficient and minimum climate damage type of production using coal has to be continuously worked on, and therefore we have not excluded ourselves completely out of the coal usage for energy production. However, modern technology will have to be used so that emissions are limited, and for which the thermal plants, in fact, I remember saying it in my July 2019 budget, that legacy old-time thermal units will be shut down. And post that, we are also looking at making sure we bring in that kind of technology which will make energy production, thermal energy production, a lot more climate friendly. But you must have read, and I'm sure you've also covered it, that in the last 2-3 days we've got to know that the total power generated in this country is now 45% coming from non-fossil fuel generating units, which means the transition to non-fossil fuel based and somewhat renewable energy. In fact, all renewable energy, not just solar, hydro, all of them have come to be 45%, which is gradual shift has brought us this distinct change in the way in which energy is produced in this country. So the transition is going through a well-planned traction and trajectory. So the commitments given by the Prime Minister as regards by 2030 we achieve this, we achieve that, will be achieved because the planning has been very careful, meticulous, without upsetting the economy as it is in a very critical stage of development. But the long-term goals will consume a lot more investment, for which we'll have to generate more resources. We'll have to invest a lot more for that.
Just to clarify, so you're saying that doesn't affect growth, but it means that we will have to spend more for growth.
Doesn't affect growth in the medium term, but we will have to invest more for the long term, which will have to be climate friendly.
I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask, which have come from the audience. And one of these is about, it's from one of my colleagues, so there's no point in naming him. Do you agree that supply side issues and Omicron are underlying threats to the economy at this point in time? Omicron, yes, but supply side issues you think would be
No, even Omicron, I would want to say it's not a threat. If a country is very clear about vaccination, and we've achieved 1.25 billion already vaccination, and we are still going ahead in that kind of a speed, to a large extent you're consciously making sure that the people are now being given that immunity through the vaccination. Nevertheless, we'll still have to follow the protocol and be careful and everything else. So I don't want to take it as a threat. We will have to keep it as a challenge for which we'll have to be careful. So with the supply side.
Question specifically taking off from the point you made about ease of doing business by Lokesh Arora on Haryana's reservation law, saying these laws seem to be against the principle of making it easier for companies to do business. What's your view?
I am not sure what the local compulsions were for the Haryana government to do it. So I would want to know what is the kind of issue which has arisen there. Even with ease of doing business, I think sometimes it is important for states also to take cognizance of what is developing locally. So I need to know more on that.
Standard question related to tax and relief for senior citizens, which I'm skipping because I'm sure you'll get as this post the budget. Discoms are struggling with overdues and recoveries. Huge sum of money is stuck. Is the government consider selling electricity on a prepaid basis only like it's done in China?
It's done in China is a different thing. Yes, it's a very real-time problem. We are engaging with the states to talk about how Discom's heavy due payment, overdue payments can be sorted out. I've said this before, many of the states offer of free electricity. I'm not saying they should, I'm not saying they should not. It's well within the state's right for whom they want to give free electricity. I'm not even getting into that debate. But whoever provides it for free will have to make a provision in their budget for payment. If you decided that you're going to give free electricity for X category of people, you're welcome to do it. But having said that, the budget of that state should have a provision made for that free electricity being given to some sections. And if that provision is given, the Discom should get that provision because they have after all supplied the product and then they are expecting you to pay for it. So unless we are making accountable practices as the best practice for such freebies, Discoms are going to be hard pressed, and Discoms don't produce by the very name that they have. They don't produce, they only distribute. The producing companies are all with the central government largely. There are some which produce renewable energy now are produced by local, regional bodies as well. So the production of electricity itself will be suffering, and it's not so commercial yet, and I don't want it to be so commercial ever, that the electricity producing companies can say to the Discom, sorry, I'm not supplying, you do what you want with your state. That cannot happen. That should not happen. So there should be a more realistic way of handling this discord. You cannot have Discoms continuously piling on their payments and expect to also have this smoothly. So there should be a methodology evolved, mechanism evolved with the states to have a smooth payment and receiving of supply. So this is, I'm very confident that the ministry is working, Ministry of Power is working on this. We hope to resolve it.
I mean, one way to resolve it would also be to encourage all politicians to stop promising free power, right?
That you from the media are doing it.
Question from Dr. Daksha Sharma. How can we further strengthen cooperative federalism, especially given how polarized the present political scenario is? Based on your own experience, the GST Council.
I'm glad you asked that. That is exactly where I was coming.
Is it still polarized?
This bit of polarization. I'm a bit uncomfortable with that expression coming to the, let's say, the GST Council. There's no polarization there. Matter of fact, it's a classic example of federalism can work. There can be a lot of discussion. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. But Eventually, solutions have been arrived at with majority of us going through and some of us with a bit of a reservation, but yet going through it. So polarization doesn't come into this institution, and I'm glad for it. And therefore, this polarization being the cause for everything that you want to say is also not right. So let's be a lot more discerning to say what could bring a greater discord in the center state or federal structure. I'll be happy to take that debate any number of times. But polarization being attributed for any discord anywhere may be somewhat easy.
Last question. This is from my side. The budget is just around the corner. I know you won't speak on the budget, but can you give our audience one sentence on what they should expect?
Well, to some extent, I can't really say to what extent or is it going to be all that. To some extent, the emphasis on infrastructure spending in some form or the other will continue. That's something which I can say.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, please give her a big hand.